Daniel 10 begins with a report of a vision by a supernatural being. The message concerns present, past, and future, illustrating how apocalypses have a much broader scope of interest than mere future speculation. The central message concerns the rise, activities, achievements, and fall of a series of kings who are unnamed but can be identified on the basis of the referenced events. We are in the third year of King Cyrus. The exiles have been set free to return to Jerusalem as stated in Ezra chapter 1. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. So things are looking up, but Daniel is still troubled by visions. Daniel states that he mourned for 3 weeks in which he abstained from food and everyday grooming. And this is where we get the Daniel fast from. And that 3-week period is explained in verse 13. The heavenly messenger was detained in a 3-week battle with the prince of the Persian kingdom, a spiritual force opposed to the Lord, until Michael, the chief prince of Israel, came to help. Now, pretty crazy, right? But cool. Now, the conflict referred to in verse 13 can be interpreted several ways. It can be a verbal or legal argument with the representative of Persia, like we see in Job chapters 1 and 2. It can be a conflict in which a warrior seeks to halt a messenger, or it could be a physical struggle between spiritual forces. Now, the Old Testament teaches that the results of battles on earth involve heaven. Usually the picture is of heavenly forces aiding Israel and enabling them to win against otherwise overwhelmingly earthly forces. Now, the Lord and his armies fight alongside Israel's armies. Now, there are spiritual armies that oppose the Lord, and earthly battles reflect battles in heaven. And whichever side wins in heaven, its equivalent wins here on earth. Now, the conflict between Persia and later Greece is the result of these nations' spiritual correspondents who opposed the heavenly messenger from giving Daniel a revelation. But the heavenly messenger is supported by the archangel Michael. Daniel's involvement in fasting and prayer, like our own when we participate in such disciplines, has a direct correlation with the events in heaven. Now, verse 21 tells us that the angel Gabriel left his battle in heaven for a brief period of time in order to come down to give Daniel a message. Now, this teaches us an important lesson. There are dark spiritual forces that seek to keep us from gaining understanding, wisdom, and insight, that build spiritual strongholds to keep us from growing closer in the Lord. However, through the power of fasting and prayer, we are able to gain revelation by heavenly messengers and overcome evil. Now, we see this theme in the New Testament. The disciples inquire as to why they are unable to cast out a demon in a small boy. And Jesus tells them this kind of demon can only be cast out by prayer. And later manuscripts would add that this kind of demon can only be cast out by prayer and fasting. Though we live in the physical world, our battlefield is in the spirit realm. And we need to take up spiritual weapons to be effective in advancing God's kingdom in this world. Exegetical notes. Verse 5 mentions a man dressed in linen. The glory described by Daniel has led many to believe this was Christ in a pre-incarnate form. This is speculative, though it is interesting the description of his body in verse 6 is very similar to the one of Christ found in Revelation 1:13 through 14. In verse 8, Daniel mentions, "I had no strength left. I was helpless." This is the physical response during human encounters with heavenly beings. In verse 12, Daniel is told, "Your words were heard." This is a great encouragement that God is attentive to prayers and answers. In verse 13, the angel states he was halted by the prince of the Persian kingdom for 21 days. The 3-week delay was the result of a spiritual force opposing the Lord's messenger. The opposing force was the spiritual representative of the Persian Empire who sought to thwart the work of God. Satan engages in heavenly warfare to influence generations and nations against God and his people. In verse 13, Michael is mentioned. Michael is the chief angel of heaven. Verse 20 mentions the Prince of Greece. The spiritual representative of Greece contested for the kingdom of Greece. Only by emptying ourselves out completely can we be filled by the Lord, His grace, His power, and His presence, and move forward in advancing the kingdom of God by His power, by means of spiritual weapons. So let's grow in our discipline of fasting, in our discipline of prayer, in our discipline of listening to the Lord, in our discipline of being obedient and faithful to seek the Lord's heart and will for our lives.